Yeah, that's pretty much. We have John C. waiting on us there. Hey, hello. We are live, and as you can see, we have the esteemed Gore Vidal here. It's
Hello, everybody.
awesome to see you. Yep. Yeah, and yeah, we had technical issues on my end, of course. Again, I thought the gremlin may have traveled through the internet and invaded Gore's house, but he's safe. It's all right. It's still here.
We are
But
good.
let's face it, if you're on this channel, it's not a party until something goes wrong. Phone calls, camera issues, whatever.
It's good
I
to
like
see
think
you again, Tim. It's good to
I
see
think
you.
it's part of the charm. Good to see you.
Thank
And what was it? I believe it was we'll just jump right in there, man. I think it was like first week of July. It was very wild. I got an email from you. I had a text from my friend Josh, and I had two other people getting a hold of me within a span of 2 hours. Everybody like, oh no, Neil Gaiman has apparently been in a little trouble. So we had a email thread going that you started with some other people that you know. But yeah, you discovered, I guess, Tortoise that you're going to explain to us what that is. Had done an investigation and a podcast coming on Neil Gaiman accusations. Is that correct?
Yes, what happened is a friend of mine who's a very big Sandman fan, and I think um, well, since he keeps up with all things Sandman,
Yeah,
he alerted me to this, and when I looked at the tortoise and who they were, I don't think they're journalists. It's a podcast, and as far as I know, one of the members is she's the sister of Boris Johnson and PM from former Prime Minister of England. And that's as much as I know about them. And that they interviewed some women.
where you said England, I believe somebody who may have founded this Tortoise. We'll call it a podcast for a better
I think it's a
word.
podcast. Yes,
I think he used to work for the BBC. Somewhere along the line
maybe,
over this last month and a half,
maybe.
he used to be with the BBC. So that's the
Hmm.
supposed journalistic part of it, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I'm just going that I don't. Let me phrase it. I don't know if they're actual journalists. I think that's
Yeah.
more accurate because I don't know.
Yeah.
And they are a podcast, and I think that's how they've been referenced by actual news agencies at this point.
Yeah.
And so I tried to listen to the interviews, but I had trouble doing it on my laptop. And so, but anyway, but I've been reading about them and reading the allegations by at least the initially it was two women. Now it's more. And
Yeah. I have a little synopsis here,
oh,
so
you do? Okay, then
yeah.
probably go with that. But that's as much I can tell you about
Yeah.
tortoise.
Yeah. So, like I said, Tortoise, apparently they're a podcast, I think. I think they did this thing in chapters. Supposedly they interviewed these two women or one
Yeah,
of these women. And it kind of blows my mind that it's being treated more like content than it is an actual crime because a police report has been filed in New Zealand. So all of this is allegedly. I'm not really back and forth if did Neil Gaiman do it or did he not do it. I believe there were incidents, with his story, her story kind of thing,
yeah.
um, but basically, these are the denied accusations. Scarlett, they to protect her identity, they Tortoise people actually said they're just using her first name, not a fake name, I guess, right? So this person, Scarlett, who's 23, alleges that Gaiman essayed her in the house hours within first meeting her in February of 2022 in a bathtub in New Zealand. I've heard different accounts that he ran a bathtub, invited her in, there was cuddling or something. But he's 61, I think 62 at the time. She's 23, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, I'm not judgmental about the age difference. Once they're over 18, considered an adult, whatever. You know what I mean? That's here, they're there. With me at least. Um,
Same.
Towards understand that Game's account is that they cuddled and made out in the bathtub. That he had established consent for this. His position is that over the 3-week sexual relationship that followed, they were uh, only ever engaged in consensual digital
Hmm.
things. So, hand play, if you will.
Yeah.
Scarlett alleges that within the otherwise relationship, Gaiman engaged in rough and degrading penetrative acts. Torres has been, taking messages, notes, and spoken with Scarlett at the time of these allegations. Then there was a second woman, Kay, who was 18 when she met Gaiman in Florida in 2003. She began a romantic relationship with him when she turned 20, and Gaiman was in his mid 40s, but alleges that she submitted to rough and painful adult encounters that she neither wanted nor enjoyed. In one incident, she alleges Gaiman, let me see if I can put this here. Anyway, she was having painful infections, and he was whatever, just kind of kept going there. And Gaiman's position is that he denied any unlawful behavior with her. And Torres understands that he believes Kay's allegations are motivated by her regret over her relationship, and that the other girl, Scarlett, was suffering from a condition associated with false memories at the time of her relationship with him, a claim which is not supported by medical records or medical history. And then there's people that were coming on here saying that it has been medically said that she did have something that creates false memories and stuff. So there is a lot of stuff that, with what Gaiman is saying he did and didn't happen, allegedly, and all this stuff going on. What are your thoughts, kind of going in there about this whole thing? Because I'll add on about his ex-wife, I guess, Amanda Palmer, and what she said to Scarlett and stuff.
When this happened, and let me go back a little bit. When Gaiman and Palmer separated, it was a friend of mine, one who keeps up with Gaiman. He told me that up until this, they had an open relationship, and I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Open relationship, correct? Is that what you said?
Yeah, an open relationship.
Yeah.
And so for many years, and I've never kept up with Gaiman's personal life, and I do with some people, but not with Gaiman. And I was just not that interested. And so when he told me that separated, and I said, I didn't know that. So both of them could see people on the side. He goes, yes, they just had to let each other know what was happening. Yeah. I go, oh, wow, I did not know that. And so that surprised me, because I had no idea. And I always think those type of open relationships, I've known a few people, none of them who are close friends of mine. Nothing that I have anything against it, but I just wanted to say that. And those things are really complicated. I don't know how that operates. Sense of jealousy, I don't know. Either it doesn't exist like it does for normal people, or they don't think it does. I have no idea. So when this news broke and I found out about this, and I found out about the open relationship with my friend and a few others. One thing I did know about Neo, this is something we all know, is that he's always had a huge female following, and readers.
Right.
Sandman brought in many of them in, but then his novels really took off with male and female readers. And when he began to teach at some universities, colleges, and some of them I think were mostly large female students. And I would say, because whenever scandals would come up with stuff with whoever, right, I would always be surprised. I would think, I have to say, I'm surprised it hasn't happened with Neil. Either some shenanigans with a student as his professor, because I know, even in my personal life, women that I know, that if they met Gaiman, I mean, they haven't said they would sleep with him, but when they speak about him, is the way I speak about Scarlett Johansson or Natalie Portman or Kirsten Dunst, or Monica Bellucci, right? And I think they're very attractive women. And so, and I had to say, I'm really surprised, not because it's Neil Gaiman, but one, he's a man.
Right.
And you have all these women around you, young women around you, who adore your work, right? And I have to say, I have to give it to him. He has not fallen into temptation. Now, mind you, all these years, I said that thinking that him and Palmer had just a regular marriage.
Right.
Not open. But now that explains maybe why he didn't have any relationship with the students, because he had an open relationship. And so the sex drive is there. It's going to be there, and you can't really, you have to always be aware of that. So regarding these two women, um, they both, there's the age difference first of all, right? Which for quite a few people of a certain generation, it's an issue. The other issue is what they said is the power dynamics. Like one of them was in work for him, and but then the third issue is, okay, when it comes to intimacy and sex, and when men and women are having sex, it's a very nebulous area. Yes, do that. No, don't do that. Yes, do that. Okay, what? And then the moment, right? And that's what these two at this point where we are with these two women. And that's why it's going to be very difficult for the police at this point, because the women stayed with him. They continued to have a relationship. One of them, it was just heavy petting, the digital thing, right? And then the other one, it seems like they were intimate. And so at this point, those allegations, which I think may be true, probably, I mean, in the sense that I believe the women. But the thing is, if you in a relationship like that with a man like this, and he's into this stuff that you'd consider kinky, it wasn't like a one-time thing and say, I'm not going to do it anymore. You continue, right? And Neil, yeah, I'm sure he knew that these girls liked him. I mean, he's Neil, right? Just like, I don't know, how many women did Led Zeppelin crew sleep with? Rolling Stones sleep with, right? That was almost all these young women on the stage to have sex with these men. Much older than they are, and they're attracted to the men. The men know they can use that for the girls.
Right.
And so anyway, that's where I stand at this point with these two. The last thing I'll say is, the reactions have been. I know the age difference, people cannot let go. Okay, separate them. The others say, well, she worked for him, and as an employer, you can't do that. That's a separate thing.
Right.
And then, but now they're involved. And it's after the fact that they say, well, the sex was rough. And so far, there's no crime in any of these things. The police have looked into these, but they haven't been able to prove anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's tough for the police. I bet the police hate these type of cases. Absolutely hate them.
Yeah, I kind of get it because you're tapping on a lot of things that are frame of mind. The email I sent when back in July when you did that, I sort of went in and gave a prediction because I just gave a big breath. I'm like, here we go again. These things seem to have a pattern. Okay. So in 2016, I was dating someone who was a fan of Amanda Palmer's music, and I really had no interest. If you're into Lou Reed and David Bowie and that sort of things like that, she's your kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was well known they had an open marriage. I use the term bohemian. You know what I mean? Like when you're an artist and you take these things very serious about music and things like that, like we all do. But when you're wealthy and you have time to really indulge yourself in this and to have the conversations, I ran with a pretty heavy art crowd in the 90s, and and I'm not talking about like pop culture art. I'm talking like modern art and things like that. And to be cool, you had to act like you cared about nothing, and you destroyed everything like that people put up there. It's not a very supportive group, and they would talk about horrible, horrible things. I'm thinking about a girl named Stephanie that got me. I was dating her, and she brought me around these people. So, I mean, it was. I thought it was just a lot of horrible people talking about horrible things, but that was the scene. And that's to be cool. You had to just act like you didn't care about anything. So I'm trying not to put that stereotype on them. The other thing is I've watched Neil Gaiman. There's a lot of documentaries coming out on a lot of comic book artists and things like that. And there's one where someone followed Neil Gaiman when he was doing this book tour, and it was really rough on him. And he would be walking through an airport and somebody would run up to him saying, "Can I have an autograph?" And he's like, "If you can, we can do it while we're walking because I'm not stopping." He was very kind of elitist is what he came out on. So you touched on Led Zeppelin and stuff. That's where I'm leading to. I'm trying to set a foundation. So if I was to speculate, what I'm going to say is that, number one, he's wealthy, not used to a lot of people saying no. He gets treated different, much like a rock star. And you got to be very careful what you put in your brain because many wrestlers have talked about being on the road, meeting ring rats and girls and fans and things like that. And once you start getting into more and more intense situations, going home to the little wifey is not going to do it for you. You know what I mean? You're on the
That's
road. That's what I'm getting at. So what I'm saying is that what people need to realize, this is why I don't listen to anybody that is a celebrity or wealthy when it comes to politics or anything. They don't live the life we do. They don't have people telling them no. They have people catering to them. There's a sense of worship and fandom, that comes with this. And that's why I'm sitting here thinking, if I was to speculate if this whether was wrongdoing on Gaiman's part, he's lived in a world where he's not going to see it. You know what I mean? So many people have thrown themselves at him, or they've talked about him, or they've really done that. And then there's people in the chat here who have been following this, and they're discovering there's NDAs out there,
yeah,
people
there are.
who are protecting Neil Gaiman and stuff, people who aren't telling them. Now, this is speculation on my part with things that are going on. I also predicted that other people would come out of the woodwork. It took over a month,
Yeah.
but when Scarlett went to Amanda Palmer to talk about the kids and stuff, she told him what Neil had allegedly done, and she said there's 13 other women with the same story. And then Amanda here in the last week or two has supposedly been hinting at on some things on some Patreon video or song. I don't know. I haven't followed that much, but two more women have come out. So I'm trying to say is it's not taken up for Neil saying that he did or did not do anything. It's that you live a lifestyle like that for so long and you get involved in relationships where you got the okay to do things. I think open marriages are a joke. Call it what it is. You know what I mean? You have a partner and you both have a interest. I've always seen the fallout of that in my line of work. I've seen people have to go get counseling because their wives were fine with the open relationship and the guy gave it a shot and all of a sudden he was like, I can't do this, and they lose their mind. I've seen the fallout. Some people it works, I guess, for them. So what I'm saying is that if I was to say and speculate is that Neil Gaiman has been famous for a long time and very wealthy for a long time, and maybe he's having a problem realizing that he's in his 60s and these women at their age don't quite have the same experiences as the people he's run across over we'll say the last 30 years. Do you follow what I'm saying vaguely here? Yeah, being aloof. So in my mind, I'm really sitting here thinking Neil may just not get it. He might still think it's 1996, my friend. You know what I mean? Because that's what's happened with other rock stars. And so far, what I thought was going to happen has happened because you just seen it before.
Yeah, again, I thought it was going to happen. I mean, if it did happen, it was going to happen maybe with one of his students. But then when I learned he had an open marriage, then this makes more sense. But
yeah,
I think what's happening with him, like I think we discussed earlier this morning when you were at your live show, and I put in the chat, is if this had happened to Alan Moore or Frank Miller,
yeah,
I think the reaction among people would have been, well, the kind of stuff that he writes, and they would have pointed out. They were gone after hard up against poor Allen. They're going to be hard against Miller. And I think what makes it difficult for Neil is for the general public, including me, because I never looked into anything negative about him or heard anything negative about him. His stories, and I think Alan Moore's, are very humane as well. He understands humanity quite well. But with Neil's stories, for people, the shock is how do you reconcile his books like Sandman, which are embedded with deep humanity, and they can see things from different points of view so well.
Yeah.
Pretty much not at a Shakespearean level. And as we know, Shakespeare is a character in Sandman. But just like Shakespeare could basically be teenagers, he could be a king, he could be a woman, he could be all these characters and inhabit them in such a realistic way. Now, we know nothing. We know very little about who Shakespeare was. But let's say they discover somewhere these documents of people that knew Shakespeare, and we learn that he's more like Macbeth and Iago, a horrendous person. Is that going to make this? Well, you know where he got the Romeo and Juliet story, because when he was a teenager, well, you know what happened with Othello. You know what he did. You know he strangled some woman. You know, and but we don't know that about Shakespeare because we know very little about it. But with Neo, I think this is the part, particularly on BookTube, because I've now been following BookTubers who read his novels, don't read his comics, and they're completely in shock because they've put this man on such an unrealistic pedestal. Right. And when people, and I'm still surprised adults do that about anyone, and it's almost they forget that they are human. And also they forget that you and I are also human. We've done dumb things in our life. We've done things, some of us, that if people knew, they would look at us completely differently.
There are things that I can say I'm embarrassed by. That was a bad moment stuff. But the thing about it is you have not lived life if you have not messed up. So I'm very wary of people who try to come off as they lived a life of perfection, if you will. Okay.
That's just it. Yeah. You know. You hear that a lot with this thing with Neo. You're hearing it a lot. I'm so disappointed. He was my idol. And this phrase, you know, just when you meet a decent man, you know, just when you meet, you think, what are you talking about? Now, it's maybe true you have not been around decent men, but that doesn't mean decent men don't exist. Certainly. Right. And it's, but this thing with him, I think that's on them. That's completely on them. That they can't get beyond this, that they're basically calling him their idol. Yeah. Has been just, at this point, defrocked in their eyes. So and they're done with it.
In the comments, so I've kind of got this literal idea, this conversation in my head. There's like, you know, Neil's point of view, what we know has happened or what has been said. And then what you're kind of getting at is, if make sure I'm following your frame of thought here, what we're getting at is the reaction of the fans, the public opinion, if you will, of people, why they feel betrayed and stuff. If you go through the comments here, there's plenty of people here that are into this. Undead Quinn, Lord Tape Man's comics, they're all over this and stuff, right? And there's many things that are coming up. There's like the hypocrisy they feel of Neil even being involved in any of this because, you know, Lord Tate's here is talking about, you know, the political part of it, the liberal male feminist. He's always had this thing where he's gotten out there on social media and said, believe all women, like just like year. Like I said, the word hypocrite and stuff. Yeah. And then, you know, and they're kind of talking about just the nature of relationships and meeting the wrong woman and stuff. So that's what I'm saying. What we got here? They're talking about Warren Ellis being canceled over what was going on with that, which I thought that was ridiculous. That was a bunch of horrible people saying that the pro quote, you know, they were saying I was here to use Warren. I was going to let Warren use me. And I'm sitting here like these are all adults having terrible choices and reasons for what they're
exactly. They were adults making terrible choices.
Yeah.
Some of us have been in those situations. Yeah.
No crime is what I'm getting at. Warren, I don't consider him canceled. He's just moved on to bigger and better things.
I have no issues with Warren, no issues with any of those guys.
Yeah.
Never had.
So a lot of what we're seeing, but I think what I want to get at is what I was talking about is I'm going to stop kind of there because there's a lot of comments going on, which is fantastic. But you've already kind of touched on like fans of Sandman, if they found these things out about somebody, finding out they have wood, you know, feet of clay, the person behind the curtain. There's we have cliches we can use to describe this because they come from truth. That's why they're cliches. It happens over and over. Yeah. And basically we're finding out that Neil Gaiman is human. You've used the word human, but there's people who really got into his work. And Sandman is the perfect thing, you know, because, you know, we know about comic books. And I think we've talked about Wanda before. The character Wanda, who in the 90s was I'm going to be repeating myself here. If you
early 90s, too.
Jump in here anytime you want. But what Neil Gaiman did was he was humanitarian. But there's a flip side to this with some of his work. If we want to look at his work and shouldn't be shocked that he's familiar with certain
no, it's not. Right. That's correct.
That's what I'm getting at, right? You know, So, he was one of the first people who came out with a balanced story where he presented a character, and as the reader, you got to make up your own mind. It wasn't preachy, you know what I mean? And it was still a character you could tell he cared about, and he gave her an ending. And it's one of the few times where I'm fine calling a he, she without pronouns. You know what I mean? Because he presented as the character, and Wanda was in a game of you, and he was friends with Barbie. I think that was her name.
Yeah.
Watch me go blank here. But anyway, Barbie disappeared into her own little dream world. There's a whole story there, right? And these witches appear, and the witches are going to do a spell where they kind of go to the moon. They speak to the moon on a mystical level and all this stuff. And anyway, Wanda wants to help, right? But Wanda is told by the witches it has to be down on the chromosomal level of being a woman because they are using bodily fluids as part of the spell and all sorts of things, right? So Wanda is left behind while they go into the dream realm to try to find Barbie. There is a big typhoon that hits, a hurricane, something, and Wanda is killed. Barbie comes back, and we find out that she's from Ohio, out in the country. So when Barbie goes out to the funeral, she gets intercepted by Wanda's aunt and said, "We're going to use his Christian name. You're not going to bring up the fact that he used to dress as a woman, and everybody's going to be happy for the family. Do you understand?" And Barbie goes along with it. So when that's over with, she goes back to the grave, and she has a little last words for Wanda looking over his grave, and then she takes out lipstick and she marks his name out and writes Wanda, who he really was. Now that's a fantastic story because it wasn't preachy, it wasn't one-sided, it didn't feel like propaganda, it didn't have an agenda. Neil Gaiman presented us with this character, had a few conversations, acknowledged why people didn't think this person was a woman down to the chromosomal level, and it was fantastic. It was a humanitarian story, and that's what fans of Neil Gaiman, that's what made them fans. So they kind of built up this idea of Neil starting even 30 years ago or before that. I have a short story of his they wrote in 1984. I have Good Omens that I bought in 1990, the summer that I was a junior, going to be a senior. I ended up writing this twice. And when they were talking about the Good Omens show coming to Amazon, I kind of said, this is the book that I read twice one summer in what I just said. And I got a screenshot of Neil Gaiman acknowledged me. He actually talked to me there in a tweet, if you will,
Cool.
So he's always interacted with his fans. That's my whole point. That wasn't name dropping or bragging and stuff, right? So Neil Gaiman, I've always sort of wondered about Warren Ellis and Alan Moore and everybody, because I've always thought that these people end up making a character of themselves that they turn on when a camera's on them, or they're around their fans. They make a character of themselves. I'll stop right there. I didn't mean to get so long-winded, but do you have thoughts on why the fans may be so disappointed or anything, anywhere you want to go with it?
No, the Game of You is my favorite Sandman arc. The Game of You, and because what he did there, you wonderfully, explained, described the Wanda story. So I don't need to do that. It was wonderful, Tim.
Right.
And,
thank you.
And I just mentioned Barbie. He took basically a toy figure. Because Barbie had appeared earlier in Sandman. But what he did with her, instead of like what they did in the movie Barbie, in the recent film Barbie, he put this Barbie with the misfits in a working class tenement, right? A real life Barbie would not be associating with people like that.
Fair enough, yeah.
And they would not be associating with Wanda. But the way he has Barbie, she's oblivious to all these things.
Right.
In the sense that, and in a positive way, she sees them as human beings. Even one of her neighbors is a lesbian and such. And these are her friends. These are her friends, and she's loyal to her friends. And that beautiful ending, what she does at the end for Wanda, he writes women really well. That's another thing. He's a man who knows how to write women. And
I'll interject just for 1 second, because what you're saying there, those stories in Sandman are in 10 chapters. Each story, he has said that the stories have a gender. Okay. Game of You, that's a female story. Seasons of the Mist, that's a male story. So he's always had that on his mind about a
That in his
female
mind.
audience. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. He said it's fine. And no, he that's just basically my point is that he can do this really well with female characters. And regarding the dark side of his story, so he has those too. I mean, those first few issues, that diner scene, which for some people they hate that diner scene. What happens in that diner where the people are basically controlled and they do terrible things to each other. So
Right.
there is that side to it, but again, it goes back to that Shakespeare level. He can do stuff like that,
Right.
right? But overall, though, there's this deep humanity to his story, and I was because I've been doing some booktube stuff, and a booktuber, she wanted to talk about Neil Gaiman, so I put in the comments kind of like what we talked about here. And from the comments, most of the people there, I don't think read comics. I don't think they read Sandman. They read his novels. And I just told them about the Norman Mailer story. I don't know if you're familiar with Norman Mailer. Mailer, the writer, right? But I don't know if you know what happened to him. In 1960, now Mailer had written The Naked and the Dead about his experience in World War II. He was already an established writer. And in 1960, he decides to run for the mayor, I think for the mayor of New York, or was it the governorship of New York? It's the mayor of New York. Not as a Democrat, as a Republican, just as an independent. He has this party, and he invites the elite, and he invites a bunch of homeless people. It was a really bizarre party. So he has this various group of people at this party. There's Allen Ginsberg there, Norman Podhoretz, who later on became a neoconservative. Back then he was a liberal, then he became a neocon. And it was a pretty wild party. Some fights broke out. And then around 3 or 4 in the morning, his wife, Mailer's wife, begins to taunt his manhood. And at one point, this is supposedly what provoked him. He says, "You'll never be good as Dostoevsky." He gets a penknife and stabs her. Not once, but twice. This is Mailer now, 1960.
Yeah.
So she goes to the hospital, but she tells the doctors that she fell on some glass. The police don't believe it. And finally she admits, I was stabbed by my husband. Mailer is initially sent to a mental hospital. But Mailer, being Mailer, says, "There's nothing wrong with me. And I don't want my writing to be infected basically by people thinking that I'm crazy. There's nothing wrong with me." Eventually, he is convicted. I think he's just served not very long, maybe a few months. His wife did divorce him. But the thing is, though, is that the intellectual elite stood by Mailer. James Baldwin stood by him. Diana Trillin, which was a major literary critic at the time, stood by him.
Right.
But the thing is, no one was really surprised that Mailer did this because his character was machismo. His character was this, right? You didn't expect. Let me phrase that. I don't think anyone was really surprised that he did this. In contrast with Neil. Neil has not stabbed him, but he's said many women have said that he's taken advantage of them, taken advantage of their situations economically, and then when they were engaged in sex, disregarded their feelings because he wanted to do certain things they didn't want to.
Like it kind of comes off like in some of the statements, my opinion, it kind of comes off as like they were how can I say this? Of course you want to do it. I'm Neil Gaiman. You know what I mean? Just the fact that he's Neil Gaiman, he seems to think that was enough that that would be consensual. You know what I mean? And that's my opinion. Indulge me here for just a second here. Tate here says, "I never read Sandman. He has unopened absolute editions on my shelf." I say read the work. Okay. I mean, I still say read the work. As far as I'm concerned, I believe in the due process. Let the police do their work. Let me put that out there. You know what I mean? Comic Crack, I did dumb shit like a week ago. We were talking about our past.
Hey.
I love that. Okay, let me go through just a few of these.
Well, Terrence.
Comic Crack said, "Eat your idols," I say. Trust the art, not the artist. Yeah, okay. Let me see here. The cannibal. We got people mentioning Bill Cosby. The dinner is brutal. They're talking about movies. Here we go, Gore. We get to plug you here. Remember what Gore's BookTube channel is again. Comic Crack would like to know.
I'm sorry. Oh, it's you think of the movie Cinema Paradiso, except with Libro Paradiso. Libro Paradiso. That's my book channel.
Nice. I don't know the details. We're just kind of skimming over the big things that's going on because he was asking about the activities and stuff.
Yeah.
So the people in the know that know things about Neil and stuff, there's a chance they're probably like not surprised. I tell you why it didn't really shock me. First of all, he is. I'm going to get the only. I'm trying to stay away from being, stereotyping people, but male feminists always seem to go down. Even in England in the 70s, one of their great English heroes was Jimmy's going to take care of it or something. He had a show in England for years where he would help kids and families out. Turned out he was into kids, is what they found out. That was a hero of England that everybody was just, their minds were blown about and stuff. What unfortunately the last couple of years, just seeing things on social media and stuff, it seems like those who are the most virtuous usually have the biggest closets with the most skeletons. That's a good way to put it, I think, right? Why else would they be so worried about the presentation, and why would they be trying to, to me, it's almost like they're trying to fix that karma, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, I've got this stuff going on. I better be putting some better things out in the universe, whatever goes through their head, Okay. And of course, I always approach it like people are flawed. That's why I've very rarely ever been starstruck, right? But I think the biggest thing I kind of is amazing me, and this is kind of what I was saying in the email. Neil is beyond comics. Okay, he's worth a lot of money. Show on Amazon. Show on Amazon, Good Omens. Netflix, we have Sandman. He has had several movies made, core of his work. Coraline. Oh, also the American Gods show on whatever that was on. 3 or 4 shows based on his work. Stardust, other movies that have been made of his work. And things like that. Tours, book tours and things. He's worth a lot of money. His fame, he gets in the 90s, 80s, 90s, he brought women and females more and more into comics. That's unprecedented. But it's kind of wild that a lot of the people who are fans of his Sandman work kind of don't realize how big he is out there in the world of literature. Comics is usually a very niche market. That's why we know about Warren Ellis. Not a lot of people outside of comics even know who's the guy that's writing Castlevania on Netflix is. Neil is bigger than that. That's kind of, and to me, where he's worth all that money, I feel like he has a lot of handlers and a lot of people kind of putting it out there. I know he's had some people cancel him showing up for whatever it was. I don't know if it's being a speaker or a con or whatever, but there's been just a few people come out there and say that we're not having Neil. Still didn't make a lot of news. And you got a handful of these YouTubers, one that you pointed out to me, who I had seen before and completely forgot about. But you got a handful of YouTubers talking about it, and only 1 or 2 of them are getting any traction on their channel about this Neil Gaiman thing.
Yeah.
And I think Rolling Stone might have reported it. And I don't even know if Bleeding Cool or CBR or anybody else did.
I think Bleeding Cool did report it. I think Variety has reported it. But it's not like a major story. But again, it's complicated because these are just allegations, and the criminal, when the police began to look into it, they still haven't found anything in New Zealand.
Okay.
And that's what's another thing. And again, this is, in my opinion, I think it's just a podcast. It's not like the Washington Post or the Guardian or the Wall Street Journal or MSNBC or even Fox News breaking this. It's just some people, and some of them maybe were BBC. One of them is related to the former prime minister, but that's about it with Neil. Now, regarding the Neil, I don't know if he is a male feminist. I don't think that's possible. I think he supports feminism like I do. I support feminism quite strongly. But I think your point is, I think the mistake he made and others do make is that when these things do happen to other people, and you say stuff like, a statement is made and you go out of your way with Twitter or whatever to say, I believe so and so,
Right.
and not only do that, but you keep piling it on, you have to be careful with that, because now you get in this situation like he does, and then, because if he has done that when other women with other people, and he's done that. And like you mentioned this, it's always like, for example, in the 80s and the 90s, you had evangelical Christians, right? The ministers, right?
Right.
The Billy, they didn't pay Billy Graham, but Jimmy, what's his name? Not, you think you know who you mean. Those televangelists, right? Who suggest that they were more Christian than others. And
Right.
then underneath, it was an abyss. And so, yes, people or the people who really can't stand gay people, among men, sometimes they themselves, are repressed
Right.
homosexuals. And I think with Neil, that's why now this is all coming. And that's why he probably wants those non-disclosure agreements, because he has, in some ways, always projected that image of himself to some degree, not as a goody two shoes, but as someone who you would be, again, people are surprised that he did this, and the women are coming out and saying what he's done. In that sense, he is partly responsible for this. But otherwise, like I think Comic Crack said about eating your idols. I remember in the late 80s, I think it was in the 80s, when the FBI, the investigation into MLK, because they had, been bugging him. They had his phones bugged and everything, and all this stuff was revealed that he was, I think, unfaithful to his wife, Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there was suggestion that he was abusive to her. And I remember being around acquaintances and college friends, and some of them were like, oh, I can't see Martin Luther King the same way again. I go, really? Really? You're going to discount what he went through? You're going to discount how he risked his life? You're going to discount all that? For some of them, they could not let that go. And I go, but the thing is, you put him on this pedestal. You put him on this pedestal. This is, disappointing. But the thing is, you shouldn't have done that with anyone.
This is a fantastic conversation. I want to back up just for a minute when I was talking about the hypocrisy of Neil and the male feminists and stuff like that. I'm going to have to start getting more stern when it gets political, because it really bothers me, because it ends up being over-explained. I don't see politics black and white. That's the problem, right? I find people saying believe all women as ridiculous as somebody saying believe all men. People do not work that way. Okay. So if I don't further explain, then all of a sudden there'll be like, I've had it done before. I had a bunch of Australian feminists come after me in the 2010s, honestly, Australia, so I've met these people. I've been through them. I've already dealt with a lot of these people. You end up having to explain more to clarify what you're saying. You know what I mean? But the thing about it is what you're talking about, MLK. And I've seen people do it with Asimov about the way he supposedly treated women and things like that. It's one thing to pursue the truth and I see nothing wrong with getting a factual idea of someone. I have no real problem with that. My problem is when the accusations happen to someone who has passed away and they can't defend themselves. Then anybody can say anything. Neil Gaiman's still alive. Yeah. You know what I mean? Neil Gaiman is having his moment to where he can go ahead and defend himself however he wants, not defend himself or whatever he's got to do. So I think that's kind of I think it's one of the things that social media has brought us for those people who want to go after things. There's a lot of insecurity with a lot of people with their arguments. That's why they argue, and that's why they try to nitpick people's social media and stuff. It's not that they want to be in a debate. It's that they want to be right. They're convinced they're right. And the higher up someone is, for some reason, a lot of people want to see them brought down. Martha Stewart, as a matter of fact, there was people celebrating Martha Stewart going to jail, a white-collar jail, just because she was wealthy. And there's that with Neil that's going to get attached to it, in my opinion, just because that happens with a lot of people. There are just people who are glad to see people brought down for whatever reason. I think Neil has also avoided a lot of that also, strangely enough. So even though it's not getting reported by a lot of mainstream news, I think it's also helping him not have these people come after him just to take somebody down. You know what I
He's
mean?
kept a low profile.
Am I making sense? You know,
He's kept a low profile also since all this happened, and which I probably think is a smart thing to do. He's denied what he's done, and what he's accused of. I'm sorry, and he
no,
just stayed out of the limelight.
yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, just going to go on things. Uh, when you go back and you read his stuff, and we spoke briefly about trying not to have somebody put out. They put out dark things, write dark things in the diner, and try not to attach that to them as like you're guilty of this. I mean, that's a plot to Basic Instinct. Did she write the book so she could use it as an alibi to stab people with an ice pick? That's where it
Oh,
comes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I'm getting. That's what they did, right? But see, I wasn't surprised with Neil and these stories and stuff like that because yes, he's wrote those humanitarian stories. But you brought up the diner where it was just that was just torture porn for 24 hours in there of Dr. D. You know what I mean? And then when he brought in Desire, Desire is walking around an S&M leather club telling people to fall in love with that woman for 24 hours, do things to her till she bleeds, and then leave her. He understands cruelty, even
he
if it's
does.
just to put in there. He understands the dark side of things. He did a serial killer convention in the 90s before the serial killers became chic in the
Yeah,
90s. You know, people forget that's when the serial killers
right.
themselves ended up becoming, they had the trading cards of serial killers. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's why I didn't, that's why this, maybe that's why I'm not hugely judgmental or disappointed in Neil to begin with. I don't really fanboy a lot. You know, like I think Watchmen is fantastic, but I'm not real interested in meeting Alan Moore. You follow what I'm saying? I like the merits of the work and stuff, right? And that's not tainted for me because the darkness is in those books. You know what I'm saying? If you where I've read them over and over and over, I'm well aware that Neil has done research or he's had his life touched by things or I don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's something in there that's genuine about some of the dark stuff he puts in there. And then I'll say this and stop being long-winded and stuff, but sometimes when people are writing things and stuff, they're working through some issues and they get that stuff out. That's one of the reasons I think people like Robert Crumb has made it to old age. Instead of acting out things that were in their head that are dark, they get it on the page. You know what I'm saying? Am I making sense here?
I think the thing is, for an artist, in the true sense of the word, an artist can basically put him or herself in any situation,
Right.
and then you have to do it in a convincing way. And that's why I don't pass judgment. Well, I mean, I'm not pass judgment, but um, if you write something, if you paint something, you make a film, or you write a song, or various songs that cover all the elements of humanity, right? I mean, it really can't be alien if it's human.
Okay.
And um, when you get to the biological aspects of things, why we do things, we eat, need for sex, need for aggression. We have all these things in us, the primal things which need us to survive, right? Then we develop
Right.
a moral code, and right, and how to act civilly around other people.
Okay.
But we still have the imagination, right? We still have our thoughts.
Right.
And if people could read our thoughts at any one moment and say, "Oh my God, did he actually think that?" Yes, he did. But you know what? You just thought right before that. So um, the uh, you're able just to do that as a writer. You're able to write these stories in a convincing way. If you're going to have a villain in the story, or someone maybe a villain, or just a complicated character, to make him or her convincing instead of black or white, you must have the gray in between, and that's where the art is important. The artist is
Right.
important, you see, and that's why Gaiman is an artist. Alan Moore is an artist, and people that we respect are an artist because they can do that. And sometimes they do live pretty good lives, right? Well, in the sense that moral lives. But when they don't, they're thinking, well, and they just didn't. But what about those people who did? But their stories, they touched on things so grim,
Yeah.
so horrible, and yet they were a good mother, good father, good grandfather, good grandmother, good friend. And you're thinking, how could they do that? Well, they are, in a sense, an artist. They can do that.
Gaiman has had characters in his stories that were like that. They were horrible people, and then you find out their family life, they weren't that bad. You know, I've well, not, I'm not going to get off track here. You made me think of something, but years ago, I heard that they found out Marquis de Sade was actually like this little runt. Like he wasn't how he portrayed his writings.
No, Desaad
Yeah,
was not like that at all.
yeah,
Desaad had problems. He wrote most of his books in prison,
yeah.
and he was into some S&M stuff, but nothing like what he wrote. Nothing.
Right, right. So that's kind of why I don't want to like go back and say that should be proof of Gaiman doing anything. It's that what we
Yeah.
just hashed through and everything like that. It's part of the process and stuff and everything like that. So that's fantastic. Um, what we got here? And Gore, if you have anything else you want to talk about, man, just pop in there with it. As you when you talk, you make me think, and that's
Same
fantastic.
here, Tim. I like speaking with you. I always do.
Three sides to a story, each the individual and the truth. Yeah, and that's why I believe in due
Yeah.
process. You know what I mean? Like if somebody's involved in something, you need to use common sense, in my opinion. You know what I mean?
Case
Let
by
it work
case
out.
basis.
Yeah,
Everything is a case by case basis.
yeah. Maybe he is a creep, but maybe they are regretful. Oh, who don't get what they want. We need proof. Okay. We've got here Sleepy Reader has popped in.
Hey, Damon.
Story of demanding fellatio from a tenant kind of fully turned me off to Gaiman.
Yeah, that's one of the recent ones. That's correct.
Right.
That's right.
And that's what I'm getting at. I'm not taking it for him nor saying he did it. I'm just sort of like, I'm not going to be surprised either way. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see what happened in the court of law. Yeah, it'll be amazing. It'll be interesting to see what is dropped. The problem is that when you are male and you get involved in a situation like this, it does follow you. It's always going to pop
Yeah.
up or it'd be attached to you. What is this? Thinks he can stop being long-winded. I own it. I just try to be considerate. He says, "I think I can stop being long-winded." I just try to be considerate, man. I figure if you come on with me, you ought to know what you're in for, possibly. Yeah.
I was thinking. I've been reading some. I've gone back to reading more novels since I moved into my new place, and not as many comics. And presently, I'm reading this book here, and I heard about it a few months ago because it was. I don't know, was it the Cannes Film Festival or what? But the film is called Consent, and it's based on this memoir by Vanessa Springora. This is a Spanish translation of the book, and it's a memoir that she wrote called Consent. Anyway, they made a film about this, and what it's about is that when she was 13 years old, this is the early 80s in Paris, her mother gave a party. And at this party, you had these writers and intellectuals. And across the table, there's this man who kept staring at her. The man was in his 40s. No, late 30s. He was almost 40. Remember, she was 13. And I think the age of consent in Paris at the time, between 13 and 14, is very young. In any event, he's staring at her. And they begin to talk. Again, it's the circle that they're in at this party. And I think the mom was in publishing, or she knew people who were in publishing. And this writer had already written some novels, some pretty notorious novels. So in any event, he's talking to the little girl, to Vanessa. And then he says, let me give you my address. You can come to my house, my apartment. So after school, she does that. She goes to see him. Now, of course, all these things, I'm sure the audience and you're thinking, what? This is insane. Well, actually, it gets worse. So she goes to see him. Nothing happens initially. When her mom finds out, this is what makes this interesting. And this book, I think, was a little bit controversial at the time when it came out a few years ago, is that her mom says, "So where have you been going?" And she says, I forget who the writer was, his name. And she says, "Well, be careful, because he's known to be a pedophile." Oh. The mom uses the word pedophilia here. And yet, she doesn't stop her daughter from going to see.
Yeah.
And eventually she talks about how she develops this relationship with a sexual relationship.
Who's the monster there? Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Who's
That's
the
just
monster?
it,
Yeah.
and well, we know he is, but the thing is, her point of writing this book was when this happened, the circle they were around, they
Mhm.
knew about him. They all knew he liked little girls. He had relationships with other children before,
Mhm.
or girls who had just turned the age of consent or right about. But it seemed to be okay. This is in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so that's what this book's about. And she's writing about it. And also their sexual practices, which would be actually quite shocking. I mean, she's not very explicit. She describes it. So eventually she got pushed back. I think when she was, it must have been the 90s when she began, when she was already an adult and began to, I think she became a journalist. But she was getting pushback from other people saying, what's the big deal? And also, you were of consent, you were of age. And again, it's different culture, right? Different, when in Rome
Mhm.
and this type of thing. But again, she says, no, it shouldn't have been acceptable. But the thing is, I'm not sure how this is going to end. I don't know how what it did with her relationship with her mother. But again, it was something that was known. The mother knew. She didn't stop her 13-year-old daughter from going to see this man, knowing fully well they're probably having sex.
Yeah. See, and yeah. Okay. I told you beforehand I only had about an hour, so I'm gonna drop that right there
I'm sorry to do
before
this.
I get all worked up because I'm a social worker and I'm like,
Yeah, because you've seen this.
Yes,
I'm sure.
Yeah. I have stories of real life situations
Yeah.
yeah. But Gore, I'm gonna go ahead and call it off. I've told you before I gotta get up at 4:45, which is about
Good chatting with you, Tim.
And don't run off when we get off
Sure.
here. But thanks for everybody that popped in here. I think this conversation went extremely well. Always enjoy talking with you, and thanks for everybody that popped up. Man, we have some great comments here. And I like how we're talking about the Count of Monte Cristo, Alexander Dumas, and Don Quixote. So, what a way, we go from Neil Gaiman and some naughty allegations to culture,
Yeah.
in literature. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Later.